Okay, Mr. Notowitz, I know you're familiar with the project and what we're doing. I'm just going to take a few moments to tell you what we'd like to do today. We're going to talk to you a little bit about pre-war life in Poland, your family, and then we're going to talk about, you were born in 1927, so we're going to talk about everything up until about the age of 9 or 10, and then we're going to talk about the invasion and what you remember. I know you were in a camp in a ghetto. We're going to talk a little bit about that, and then we're going to talk about liberation. And then what brought you to Tennessee. So I know it sounds like a whole lot. We can start with something. It says you were born in Germany and then you moved to Poland?
Well, I was born, which is in a city which is now Poland.
Oh, okay.
It's, but I don't talk about it because there's so much explanation. How could it be you're born there and what did the country move? You moved away from the city and the country moved into the city. Yes, so I just claim I was born in Poland.
It's easier that way.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about life in Poland.
My life. I was one of 3 children. I was a middle child, but I was sort of a mama's boy. My mother was a former school teacher, and I was real close to my mother. I had an older sister who was a year and a half older than I was, and she was more into social activities. We living in a little town where you can walk from one end of the town to the other end in about 5 minutes. And population in the town was about 4,000, of which about 2,200 were Jews. And there was no railroad at the time when I lived there. There's one now. I was going to a boys' school together with Catholic boys. The Catholic boys had catechism studies, and the Jewish boys had Jewish religion taught by a Jewish teacher. The girls went to girls' schools. In the afternoons, I went to a Hebrew school. And the picture that I showed you here is the picture of the, as we call it, Talmud Torah, the learning of the Torah. It's Hebrew school. And you progressed from, there was no such thing as not going to the school. And you progressed from early childhood where you learned to read without understanding what you were reading, but just to read the prayers, and then until you graduated to reading the scriptures, and then reading the Talmud, the Mishnah, the Gemara, and those things may be foreign to you, but that's the way it was. And then we had time to play soccer and some sports. We were sort of segregated from the Polish population, not necessarily because of any law or any restriction, but the Jews kept to themselves and the Poles kept to themselves. I remember one time my teacher in the public school told the priest, I was a good student, and he patted me in the back of my head, and I couldn't live it down. I was touched by a priest, you know. I wasn't kosher, and but that's the kind of life we led. You might say, we were middle class family. My father was he was in the banking business. He had the foreign exchange department in the bank. And he was also a partner in a meat export business, which is, he was in there as an investment. My mother, of course, was at home, a housewife. And, I remember things that we did. My sister started school. My sister was born in February 26, and I was born in October of 27. And so she started school before I did. And she taught me some of the things that she learned in school, and I taught her to read. I started reading in real early, way before school. And I read both German and Polish. And on Saturdays, it was a day of rest. The stores were closed. And my father would take a nap, and my mother sometimes would take a nap. But I would sit with her and read to her, and read books, Wild West stories. I thought that the United States was all settled by the Germans. There was an author by the name of Karl May, or May, M-A-Y, who wrote Wild West stories, and all the good guys were Germans, and all the bad guys were, Indians, and she would sit with me patiently and listen, and I would read, and I was pretty proficient, and it wasn't until much, much later when I read about Karl May, I found out that he never set foot in the United States. It was all a figment of his imagination, or things that he read in books about the United States.
Tell me about your experiences with any anti-Semitism.
What anti-Semitism?
There wasn't any?
Well, there must have been, but I never experienced anti-Semitism. I was, as you see in that picture, I had a white collar, and I didn't have the side payas, as they called it, the curls. And I learned Polish, and I associated with Polish boys, and anti-Semitism existed, but I didn't experience it as such. In fact, after the war, when I went back to this little town, I had people tell me, "Why don't you just stay here? You're just like one of us." And it was, the opportunity was there, and but I.
You think it's because you were so assimilated?
Well, I don't think I was assimilated. We were still separate, but lived in separate areas. But we were we could talk the language, and we had, and I don't remember of any kind of anti-Semitism as such directed against me.
What do you remember about the invasion of Poland?
I remember a whole lot, but you wouldn't want me to talk about it.
I want to talk about it.
Well, see, the war broke out the 1st of September, 1939, and the Germans came into our little town where we lived on the 10th, which was a Saturday. And the Polish army kept retreating, and all of a sudden, that little town we were, they decided, oh, somehow they were caught in a fight, and there were 162 Germans killed in that little town. And we were taken to a field that day. The men were separated from the women and children, and we spent the night out in the cold. It was cold at night. It was hot, warm in the daytime. And we were worried about our father, but he showed up in the morning. And while we were out in the field, they demolished or burned 162 homes. And they were firing the shots over across the field where we were. They had the artillery on the other side. And but we got over. They wouldn't let us at first into our homes, but toward the end of the next day, we got there, and the German soldiers looted the houses, not necessarily Jewish or non-Jewish. Well, we don't know of any others, but all the homes were looted. They were taken away. I had a collection of stamps that I was so proud of, and some German soldier came and took it. I really was heartbroken. But after that, we closed up the house and went into a village where we stayed with some people that we knew for about 2 weeks until
And this was when?
This was in 1939 in
Right
September.
after the invasion.
Yeah, right after they came in.
What, the people that you stayed with, were they Jewish?
No.
Did they know you were Jewish?
Oh yeah.
So they were hiding you, in essence.
Well, they didn't. There was no such thing as hiding. It was just we were there because it was a sort of. We didn't know who was coming or going.
You know what was going on.
And then we went back to the house, and then it started out. You see, the Germans posted proclamations saying that all Jews, this is who started, when the civil administration took over, all Jews have to wear white armbands on their right arm with the
Do you
start
remember
of
what
their
you were feeling like the first day you had to do that?
We, it got to be a symbol of pride. We had armbands embroidered. We had some of the girls wore them down below the arm, and it was. We didn't look at it as a symbol of persecution. But what they did do is if you wore an armband, they could take you, snatch you from the street, and put you to work until they established what they call a Judenrat, a council. And the man who was in charge of the Judenrat was a doctor who had studied in Vienna and fluent in German. And my father was the second in command. And we established an administration where the council designated, they wanted so many people to go to work, they designated, it was an orderly fashion, but it designated so many people go to work on such and such days. And this is where I started to go to work outside but by the way, the schools were closed for the Jewish students.
Right.
So we didn't have school. And I decided, I'm a big decision maker. I volunteered to go to work. There was a opportunity to go to work and work on the road, either building the roads or shoveling snow in the wintertime. And I volunteered to go to work because I sort of wanted to take off the pressure off of my father. And I worked. And one of the things that saved me is the fact that I established a reputation of being a worker.
You think that saved you?
Yeah.
How?
Because when they liquidated the ghetto, when they took us to a place called Rzeszów, and in Rzeszów is where they made the distribution, final distribution. The people, like my mother and the rest of my family, went to Belzec, which was strictly a death camp. They were there, taken there, they were unloaded, undressed, and marched to long trenches that bulldozers dug and machine gunned into them. I was taken to a camp. The camp was Pustkov, because I had been working. And in fact, my mother wrote to me. She
While
wrote,
at the camp?
well, yeah, I got one letter in the camp.
They gave you mail?
Yeah. And I don't remember whether it was through the post or through somebody who came to the camp. But my mother wrote to me, your friends, now these are my age friends, your friends are so jealous because you know where you are and we don't know where we're going. Yet in the same letter she wrote, people received letters from the ones who had gone on previous transports, and they are telling us that they're being resettled on farms. And I hope we arrive there safely. I mean, she was looking forward to the trip.
Tell me about the camp. What were your jobs at the camp?
The camp was it was bordered, it was at the edge of a forest. And what we were doing is we were cutting down trees and digging stumps like
Clearing out the forest?
like we did in the last couple of weeks here. And building roads. And what they eventually put up there was factories. They built factories because he was in God's unsacred area. And that's where we were. And that's when we found out that after we were there a short period of time, we were there from about the 1st of July. I don't know exactly the date, until November 15th.
What was it like for you? What do you remember the most?
Well, one of the things that I remember is for two people who stayed in from work one day, and evidently there was an inspection, and when we came back, there were two bodies. I was a little boy. I mean, you know, I was 13 years old. And I applied myself. I worked hard, and
Do you attribute your survival to your sense of strength?
no, not necessarily. I attribute my survival primarily to people who didn't push me, didn't send me, you know. And this man who said to me, you know, to begin with, when we found out they were going to take us away from there, somewhere else, and some of the young people decided to, said they were going to make a break for it. And I didn't know that I was going to go. I didn't know. You know, I didn't have anybody close to me. And then this man, who was really not that close to me, he worked for the company that my father had an interest in, but that had nothing to do with it. And we were so different. I mean, he was a laborer, and we were like, you know, went to school. My sister went to Lyceum, like high school here. Anyway, and he said to me, "Are you coming with us?" You know, when they were getting ready to go. And I said, "Yeah, sure," not knowing what else to say. And I grabbed whatever I grabbed, and I went with him. And you know, for all those years, he sort of looked after me. His granddaughter wrote to me, and she said that Grandpa used to tell us how he punched you in the back to straighten out your back. I mean, I had forgotten all about it, and but that's where the I don't know. I just think it was luck.
Tell me about the day of liberation. What do you remember?
Well, we knew that the Russians were coming. We knew that the end was near. But we also had problems with the Polish underground. And let's see, a couple of guys went out and were caught and killed. And then they had another 4 that went out that they caught. And there was one man who guarded them. But see, the people who were killed, the first 2, it was sort of open. And they were afraid that the publicity is going to do more harm than... And so they kept those 4, and they were going to take them that night and kill them. And one of the guards that guarded them used to work for one of the boys' father in a mill. And he went and got Russian soldiers, and they liberated them. So they saved their lives. And we saw first 7 soldiers patrol there. So I didn't know that they were in the army. They were so dressed different. pieces of
Did you realize what was
clothing.
happening when it was
Oh yeah,
happening?
yeah. We knew.
What was going through your mind?
Well, you see, while we were in the forest and while we were hiding, we just didn't have, emotionally, we were dead. There was no feeling of, and here was the opportunity that you said to yourself, I made it. I did. I really survived. So, I mean,
When you think about it, what do you think about?
well, I had a lot of trouble. See? I get so emotional.
That's okay.
What happened was, see, my problem was I was brought up in a family where we did things like a family. For instance, no, I'll deviate from 1939. The war was on. The German campaign in Poland was over. We were reading the German newspapers. Christmas, 1939. Big, full-page letter and reply. Letter is from a German woman whose fiancé was in the army and he was killed in Poland. And she had a child and no father, and she wasn't married. And we read the letter, my mother read it, and everybody was crying, tears, human interest story. And Hitler himself wrote to her what a great deed she did for the country, having a son to replace the father who couldn't have died a better death than to defend the country. And, something like that. Now, this is before the real persecution started. We really had no business doing this, but that's the way we lived. And we were a closely knit family. And I was 14 when I was in the woods, and no supervision, no instruction, no nothing. I mean, I used to read scraps of paper that we found here and there. There was no way that I could face the world the way I was, and especially after I was liberated, and I was in a private home. There were two other boys and I that we escaped, stayed together. We had the housekeeper, and she sort of looked after me. I mean, but I cried at night because I didn't have mother. And see, I get so emotional about this thing that now I shouldn't do it, but I mean,
Where was your mother?
where?
Did you know where at the time?
Oh yeah, I knew she was dead because we found out when we were still in the camp. We found out where they were taken. We had some guards that we bribed, and when I say bribed, we were in the camp, but we knew where things were buried, and people who, when the war broke out, we told them to get the things, and so they went, and they found out that the trains went up to a certain point, and past that point the trains didn't go. And then they found out from some eyewitnesses that bulldozers dug the trenches, and they were machine gunned into the
So
trenches.
it didn't go through your childhood, didn't go through your teen years.
Yeah, that's.
You were a child and then you were an adult.
I have 4 children, and when we were bringing up the children, my wife used to say, there were times she'd say, "Now you don't understand them. They're teenagers. You were never a teenager yourself." I wasn't. You see, I never felt sorry I felt sorry that I lost my parents at such a young age. But one of the things that I felt was that I was deprived of the gradual change, from childhood to teenagers to adulthood, or go through the period of time. I was faced with a situation. I finished the 5th grade, and I said to myself, what am I going to do? Where am I going to go? And it was a problem. And there were these people in Poland who said, you can stay right here. And I probably could have. But I had a religious background, even though we weren't that strictly observant. Excuse me.
Sorry, I'm going to do a tape change real quick.
Okay.
What we'll do when we come back is talk about Liberation Day and what you remember about the liberation. We'll talk. Tell me about Liberation Day.
Yeah, surprisingly enough, I don't remember anything exciting. I know one thing. We went out. There were a number of us. There were a total of us. The total was 8 survivors. But I don't know whether it were 2 or 3 or 4 of us. We went, and this is the Liberation Day. This was it. And we went to this farmer's house, and he had cooked. He knew we were coming over there, and he had cooked soup, and hot soup, and gave us soup.
How was that?
And I threw up right after. And my stomach couldn't absorb it. I had not had any hot food, and I remember that was sick, made me sick to my stomach.
So you
But-
don't remember Liberation Day very well?
Well, I don't remember anything that was any different than any other days. We had a house there that people lived in, and I let them stay there. And I went to see some people. I remember we transferred some bodies of people who were buried where they were killed
Mm-hmm.
and transferred to the cemetery. And there was this old caretaker there. And I remember this, I laughed so hard. He looked at me. He said, "Are you still living?" I said, "Do you think I'm a ghost?" I mean, that's, funny.
And how old were you on Liberation Day? Around the time of Liberation?
I was, let's see, that was 1945. It was 17. No, 17. I was liberated in August, and I was 18 on my next birthday. And I stayed in that town for a while. I was there. The Russians came in, and the war was progressing. Poland is cut through right in the middle of the Poland by the Vistula River, and they got as far as the Vistula River, and it sort of went and got to Warsaw. And in Warsaw, the Polish underground rose up because they didn't want the Russians to liberate Warsaw. They wanted the Poles to liberate Warsaw. And they got their orders from the government in London. And the Germans, when they got to Warsaw, they put up resistance. And so they, now this is what I heard. I mean, this is not, I wasn't there.
Right.
But the Poles appealed to the Russians for support, artillery support. And so the reply that the Russians sent was, "Come under our command and we'll give you the support." He says, "We take our orders from London, our government in London." And so they said, "Let them give you the support." And evidently, the Germans massacred a great number of Polish underground members. And then when the Russians stopped, the front line stopped, and then when they started the offensive, they crossed and they chased the town where I was became a headquarters for the Russian army, Russian First Ukrainian Army, and Marshal Zhukov was the commanding officer, and he was staying in a house about 3 houses down to where we were living. And I felt kind of comfortable with the Russians. I mean, I felt comfortable with anybody who let me stay on my own. And I'd go to their, they have their propaganda officer, and they had a place where you could read and get books and the guy that started teaching me Russian. You know, I was a young boy, and he started telling me about Russia, and I listened, and I lived in Poland with these other 2 guys. And I mean, well, how can I describe it? There was a time where things were not available unless you got them somewhere on the black market. For instance, one time a Russian soldier brought us 40,000 needles. Now, a needle to you doesn't mean a thing because you probably don't use it for years. You never use it. But a needle to people who don't have stores to buy clothes and don't have places to go when they darn their socks or put, like my mother said to me in the letter, she said, be sure you keep your clothes clean and repaired and darn your socks. And so this was a fortune. And I remember I was a little boy, I was a young boy. I went to a place called Rzeszów, it was the biggest city, and to try to dispose of 40,000 needles. Not all of them, but we got a real good price. And I had, I started leading a life of, I was a young boy, and they would check you. There was a man had $100 bill, and you couldn't cash $100 bill. And so I got on a bike, rode about 30 kilometers to the biggest city, and I got changed it into $10 bills. And the man was happy to pay 10%. And that's how we lived. And I participated in a lot of the things that we did. The American Joint Distribution Committee had an office in Warsaw. And we formed a committee, 3 of us. I was the secretary-treasurer. And people who came from this town, who lived in the United States, sent us money for the survivors and for people who come back. And I went to Warsaw to get the money. And I come into this office, and I have, you can't conceal, you're 18 years old or 17 years old. And he said, the man looks at me, he said, that committee of yours is anybody older than you? And I said, well, yes, they are. Then how come they didn't come? I said, they felt that I was capable. And they gave me some of the money, but the man came and checked us over. And when I went to Warsaw, my father loved the opera. And he used to take, not my mother, my father, he used to take a bus from our town to Rzeszów, the bigger town, then take the train and ride about 4 to 6 hours from Rzeszów to Warsaw or Krakow and go to the opera and then come back usually the next day. And I couldn't wait to go to the opera. I had an education, 5th grade education, but I've got to find out what my father saw in this thing. And they had an opera house, which didn't have walls. It had long blankets hanging down, and it was cold. And I saw these people. I think it was those Italian operas.
What do you think?
And I stood there, and of course they didn't have many seats, stood there and heard these people screaming and yelling. And that kind of voices wasn't like, and I couldn't imagine how anybody can like something like that. And but that was
When you think about the war, what do you think most about?
about the war.
When you remember it, what do you remember the most?
Well, see, I remember the early part when we were together, and you see, then my later part, when my father was taken away in '41, he was sent to Auschwitz, and he was killed, and I became the head of the family. I mean, my sister, technically, and my mother sort of looked after us, and we kept kosher in the ghetto. And I came home one day, and because I heard that some of the people that I worked with would buy non-kosher meat, and it was a lot cheaper. And I told my mother, why not do that? And we had a stove, and she put a tin partition so that one wouldn't go over. I mean, that's the way we lived, and we were not that observant. And I ate more meat as a result of eating non-kosher meat. And she was a hustler. I mean, she looked to see that her children were taken care of, and she had a pass. She could go out of the ghetto, and she told me, you see, she left a lot of things, like we had some silverware, and she left it with the principal of the school, my school, and I went to claim it, and she never saw it. I mean, there's nothing you could do about that. And so,
What do you want people to know?
If you were in front of a group of 30, 10-year-olds, 12-year-olds.
well, I do come before them. I come. I want people to know how one people can take the law in their hands, pass the laws, and do things seemingly legal, and to persecute, to do to another people what, I mean, the ultimate, kill them.
Do you want to teach them that their freedom is precious?
Well, I usually try to impart the things that what I had gone through, not because I did something, not because I lived somewhere, but for the simple reason that I was born Jewish, that I was a Jew. And but I did a lot of things that I never was ashamed that I was a Jew. Christians in Poland around Easter time, and they thought, the Jews killed Christ, and there was Jews didn't show their faces outside, and I never had that feeling, and but we really had. I mean, to be a Jew at that time, and to remain a Jew, and I have. I think I have a lot of strength in my Jewishness, because I had a good friend and associate who tried to convert me for years. I mean, he felt that I deserved to be saved. And I got to a point where I really told him that I feel insulted. And I mean, I knew he meant well, but
Sure.
but he did things that I just didn't think were that right to, and yet he felt that he's the one that is going to be saved, and I'm not. But that's where the
Well, do you have
but-
anything else you'd like to add?
well, one of the things that I always say, and see, I came to New York in 1947, and the first thing I did was look for a job, and the second thing I did was went to school at night. I got both, a job and went to school at night. And within the first few weeks, they put me in the 5th grade. I was in 5th grade, and by the way, while I was in Germany, I also went to school in Germany. I was in 5th grade, and I was embarrassed with the children there, and I was grown, and I got a tutor, a German student, to teach me, because I discovered a new world, algebra. I mean, things that if you don't know about it, you don't know.
Sure.
And I went to a play, and a German play, and I saw people so involved in it, sort of. I mean, they knew what was going on. It was a play. I think it was Antigone, which is not that easy to digest.
Sure.
And I was left cold, and I was told that you have to be educated. And I said I enrolled in night school, and within first few, I came to New York in February March 14th, 1947, and by the end of May, I had taken tests, and I passed the elementary school and the 5th grade and the whole elementary school, and I was eligible to go to high school.
Yeah.
And then in the summertime, I had enrolled in an English-only school that was offered by the Labor Council or something like that in New York. And then I was eligible for high school and started high school in New York. At the same time, when I came to New York, I looked up people, relatives, and in fact, I went to work for one of the relatives, and he gave me a job, just like he gave jobs to any other people. And a man from the union came in and said, "You got $2." I said, "What for?" He says, "Join the union, you get 75 cents an hour." Then my relative said to me, "Why'd you have to join the union?" I said, "Why didn't you pay me 75 cents to begin with?" Anyway, some other relatives said, "You have relatives in Memphis." It was really my father's cousin, no close relative. And my cousin had a wife who was 32 years younger than he was. And he was up in age, and she they would come to New York on buying trips. They had a store in Memphis. And the relative in New York arranged for me to meet them. And they said, why don't you come to Memphis? I said, no, I've got a job here. I've gone to school here. Well, we'd like for you to come to Memphis. I didn't know whether it was serious, like, come see me sometime. But I said, let me come for a visit during spring break.
Right.
And I took the bus, and I came, left New York, and came. And you know how you come from New York, past the Mason-Dixon line. Anyway, I made it.
You loved it.
I came to Memphis, and it was the eve of Passover. And my aunt, I called her aunt, but, I couldn't say, hey, my second cousin's wife, you call her like that. I said, Aunt Esther, everybody called her Aunt Esther. She had about 30 people, and there were no great Hebrew scholars. And, when you read on Passover, you read the story of the Exodus, and they were all Orthodox, and you read it in Hebrew. You don't understand it, and sometimes you read the English. And it came, they all read passages and struggled through, and it came to me, and I was fluent. I mean, I really zoomed through, and they gave me more sections, and I keep telling my wife, I snowed him at that thing. And so the next morning, my aunt says to me, you're not going back to New York. I said, look, I can't. I didn't know what she had in mind. She said, we're going to register you at Christian Brothers High School. It's a private school. And she had a cousin whose son went to Christian Brothers. So and I didn't go back to New York. I sent for my stuff. I went to Christian Brothers and got credit for my foreign language and things, and went to summer school, and I graduated in 2 years.
Wow.
And then I got a scholarship to Vanderbilt, a tuition scholarship.
Right.
And it took me 3 years to graduate. And I was a good student.
I'll bet.
And
I remember didn't they say that about you early on?
I say, see, one of the things that I bring out, and whenever I talk to people, to children, when my mother wrote the letter to me, the letter that I got, she had said that, told me all the things, keep your clothes repaired, and be sure to eat warm meals, and don't trust people too much with whatever you have, because they'll take advantage of you. And one of the things she said, I hope to be able to see you again, but if the good Lord denies me that, I want you to do one thing for me. The best way to get anywhere in the world is by acquiring an education, as much of it as possible. Promise me that if you have a chance, you'll get a good education. And that always brings tears to my eyes. And it works in a lot of cases. Children, I've had the satisfaction of it. Like there's the Facing History in Ourselves. And each year they have a banquet. And it was either last year or the year before. there was a girl from a school, a black girl, who said she was sort of going through school without any purpose, and then she heard me. And it sort of gave her an incentive to apply herself. And it made me feel good. You see, I'm such a softie.
Well, it's been an honor for us to talk to you.
Well,
And I'm gonna